This is Tornado Talk, a podcast about one of nature's most fascinating phenomenon. Share your tornado story with us by email, Jen and Dan at tornadotalk.com. That's Jen and Dan at tornadotalk.com. Now, meteorologists Jennifer Naramore and Dan Holliday. Tornado Talk is on.
May 27th, 1997.
I don't really think that today I even still realize how strong that storm was.
This F5 tornado, because of the slow movement, was over any given home for about 180 seconds, about 3 minutes.
I realized something had happened in Jarrell that I couldn't see from where I was. I just knew that they were sending every ambulance they could find to Jarrell.
Generally, everybody that was in the Double Creeks estates that were hit by that tornado died.
I feel like I've been robbed. Family gatherings and celebrations, hugs. It's such an empty hole.
The pain of losing 4 loved ones in a massive F5 tornado is still as raw for Linda Mooring as it was the day it happened. A total of 27 people perished in Jarrell, Texas on the 27th day of May in 1997.
For Linda and others, they wonder why anyone had to die when there was so much advance warning. After all, the tornado was moving so slowly, there was plenty of time to seek shelter. But the twister's slow movement actually became the reason so many didn't survive.
We wanted to learn more and understand what happened when a unique series of circumstances altered the atmosphere's so-called rules. Jarrell may have suffered the most damage and loss of life, but there were other Central Texas communities shell-shocked by a tornado-producing supercell that afternoon. That is where it all started.
To produce severe storms and tornadoes, the atmosphere needs moisture and instability. Just what fell into place early that Tuesday morning?
I got up Tuesday morning, the 27th, went out about 6:30 to get the newspaper out of the yard, and I was struck by the extreme heat and humidity at that hour. It was oppressive heat, very high humidity. I later learned that the dew point was in the 77, 78 degree Fahrenheit range. That's what you expect down on the coast around Corpus Christi or Galveston. You don't expect that inland. And so I knew that if we had storms later that day, that they were going to have a lot of energy to feed on.
That is Lon Curtis. He was the assistant chief of the volunteer fire department in Belton, Texas, and would be chasing storms that day. He says his real job was first assistant district attorney in Bell County.
Before I left to go to work, I did a quick surface analysis and found that there was a stalled boundary of some sort from near Fort Worth to west of Waco, west of Temple, west of Austin, and on out into the hill country. I didn't know what that boundary was, other than that it was drier air to the west and this extreme moisture and heat to the east. And that boundary basically didn't move all morning. It just was sitting there. The winds aloft were weak. I do remember looking at an upper air observation from Del Rio, which is over 150, 200 miles to the southwest. And their 7 a.m. sounding that morning had over 5,000 joules of CAPE. That would be extreme in the afternoon. So I knew the atmosphere was really charged up, but I also knew the winds aloft were weak.
And weak winds aloft would push any storms along at a slower than average pace. That ingredient would play a devastating role in what was to come that afternoon.
Bruce Thomas was also watching the weather closely. Today, he's the national spokesperson for Midland Weather Radio. In 1997, he was a meteorologist at KCEN-TV in Temple, Waco, Texas. Bruce and Lon Curtis were friends. He gave Lon a call that morning.
And I said, Lon, I'm going to be in this class, an investment class that I'd signed up for down in Temple, Texas, from around noon to 1 that day. And to call me if the weather got going, and I'd head on to work, because we felt like it was going to be a severe weather day. And I went on to this class. I drove down to the class, and I was in an old Lincoln Town car. It was like a 1990 Lincoln Town Car that my mother and father-in-law had given us to carry the kids around in. It's an old car with 100,000 miles on it. And I went to class, and I told the teacher, and not to be rude, but I said, if this phone rings, I need to get up and take the call because it means there's bad weather coming. And so I put the phone down on the table, and we went through the class. And about 45 minutes into the class, the phone rang. And I picked it up, I took the call, and Lon said, thunderstorms are going up.
The only way I can describe this cloud is it looked like an atomic bomb had gone off. There was a cumulonimbus that was just straight up in the air.
It was midday in central Texas, and already an explosive storm was underway. Lon said he called his office to let them know he wouldn't be back for the rest of the afternoon so he could storm chase. After grabbing a sandwich at home and looking at what data he could find online, the storms turned severe.
Because I was monitoring Waco Department of Public Safety, dispatcher was looking for any unit in the vicinity of west of Hewitt. I have a report of a tornado. I need somebody to check.
Stations, National Weather Service has issued a tornado warning.
So I called Bruce and I said, okay, so DPS is reporting a tornado west of Hewitt. You need to go right now, Bruce. And I said, do you want me to call Ann, his wife?
I said, Lon, I'll call her, and I'm gonna head. I'm getting in the car right now. And I got in that old Lincoln Town Car, and I opened it up, fast as it would go. Got to the station, and the car was smoking. And I don't talk about this very often. So called my wife, and she got the baby, my daughter, and herself in the bathtub with their pets. And the first tornado touched down about 2 miles from my house. And these storms were moving south. They're moving opposite direction as you generally consider a tornado. Most tornadoes move northeast, and this one moves south-southwest.
KCEN-TV would begin its wall-to-wall weather coverage with Bruce Thomas on the air for the rest of the afternoon.
Coming out of Hewitt, moving out towards Interstate 35.
Meanwhile, Lon Curtis was on the move to see the first tornado of the day between Lorena and Hewitt.
I saw it. It was around 1:15, 1:20 in the afternoon, and I eventually closed to within a mile of that because it was moving extremely slowly. The tornado passed about a mile south of me, and I saw it destroy a mobile home and damage a site-built house. So as soon as it had dissipated, I went down to see if anyone was injured, if I could be of any help. And about the time that I got there, the local volunteer fire department arrived, and so I was ready to go someplace else.
Lon chose to head back to Bell County. The supercell spawned another twister that would be on the ground for nearly 4 miles. It began in open country on Southside Farm to Market Road, just over 1.5 miles east-southeast of Moody, Texas. The storm traveled south-southwest, moving across Dow Road, where a home and a barn were destroyed. Another home was damaged just to the north.
When it hit Moody, Texas, we actually had what we called a sky cam. And this was a fairly new thing at TV in the mid to late 90s, is to have a camera up on top of your station where you could take time-lapse pictures. Well, when the tornado came just a few miles west of the TV station, it truly should have hit us. But instead of going south-southeast like the original warning from the Weather Service, this tornado went south-southwest. And we videoed the tornado on the ground going right by the TV station, hitting homes, and we were live, and they had me superimposed using chroma key over the tornado as it was hitting these houses. And this was one of the first times, I think, in America, in TV history, maybe, that you had a live tornado hitting homes with a TV weatherman standing there talking about it.
While this historic day was unfolding, a 9-year-old weather enthusiast was watching TV at his home in Bruceville, Eddy, Texas.
And the TV was on, and we were just watching this circulation out near Moody. Of course, I'm kind of worried about that.
That's Mark Eslick, who graduated from Texas Tech University in 2017 with a degree in atmospheric science, wind energy, and psychology. But on May 27, 1997, he was a wide-eyed child seeing a tornado for the first time. That twister would cause F3 damage.
I just remember looking at it, and that was just for, a cloud going from the earth all the way into the sky and just pulling up anything in its path, whether it's a house. And just something that strong can cause so much damage. It just kind of mesmerized me.
In the meantime, I managed to get back ahead of it, but at some distance before it dissipated 7 miles northwest of Troy, which is in northern Bell County. I got fueled up and headed on back down toward Belton on State Highway 317. There were scanner reports of a tornado developing at Morgan's Point, and I was a little south and east of Morgan's Point, so I turned off of Highway 317 in Belton and went out toward Belton Lake. And as I was traveling west, before I got to where I could see back toward Morgan's Point, there was a tornado well ahead of me that we later determined probably was on the Fort Hood Reservation, military reservation, and is another undocumented. It's in the record as 4 miles west-northwest of Belton, but it was never investigated because that's a military reservation and there's nothing on it but trees and grass and things like that.
Another tornado that began 6.5 miles north of Belton at Morgan's Point on the north side of Belton Lake continued moving south-southwest.
It kept going. It just missed the high school in Belton, Texas, and went across Lake Belton, which is a big reservoir outside of Temple, Texas, and Belton, Texas, in Bell County, the county north of Jarrell. And it picked up fish and dropped shad and little fish all over the parking lot at the high school. So when people came out of the high school, they had little fish on top of their cars. And it's just little things like that you hear about after these tornado events that just absolutely amaze you. And so this whole event keeps unfolding. My friend Lon Curtis is following the storm, photographing it, calling me, calling into the TV station.
And that led me to the west side of Belton, and I took a farm to market road out to Stillhouse Hollow Reservoir, where there is another dam with a road across it. And I'm going across the dam, and in my peripheral vision, I'm looking at the road across the dam. As I cross the dam, I see a funnel immediately ahead of me and to the left, a funnel cloud. And I look down in the spillway area below the dam, and there's great big pecan tree limbs being flung into the air. The tornado was literally right there by the dam.
At Morgan's Point, the twister did F3 damage, F1 damage at the Stillhouse Hollow Dam.
The time was approximately 3:05 in the afternoon. A small, thin tornado touched down less than a mile west of I-35 near Prairie Dell, Texas. But within moments, everything changed.
And there was a new tornado. 2 or 3 minutes after I left Prairie Dell, I looked back, and there is a multi-vortex tornado that is in Williamson County north of Jarrell. And my heart sank at that point.
Even though the residents in Jarrell saw what was coming, they couldn't fathom how their community was about to be changed forever. More after the break.
The Tornado Talk podcast was born out of a labor of love in the spring of 2016. Each episode, we dig deep to bring you fascinating stories about how tornadoes have affected the lives of everyday folks. So far, there have been 34 episodes. If you haven't heard them all, we invite you to subscribe on iTunes so you can receive them the moment they are released. And if you take just a few seconds to give Tornado Talk a review on iTunes and let us know once you've posted it, we will send you a pair of Tornado Talk koozies absolutely free. Thank you for your support from the team at Tornado Talk and TornadoTalk.com.
It initially touched down to the north of Jarrell, about 3 miles, and it was at a weaker stage. I would estimate about an F3.
That's Dr. Don Green, a meteorology professor at Baylor University. He's been teaching there since 1979. Dr. Green's forensic studies on what happened in Jarrell are documented worldwide. As the tornado moved closer to Jarrell, it decimated a cotton field, lifting up several inches of soil. Then it roared across a wheat field, pulling the crop up by its roots.
Beyond that was a cattle field. The estimate on the cattle was something like 125 head of cattle. Half of them were never found. The cattle that were found, for the most part, had been picked up and bounced around. They all had broken legs, and interestingly, the shafts of wheat had been sewn into the hide. That is, almost like stitching.
Back at the TV station, Bruce Thomas had a network of spotters informing viewers of the danger looming in Jarrell.
Tornado on the ground.
We had ham radio operators on the storm radioing back from Jarrell as it was coming into town.
It was 4 different vortices rotating around a central point associated with the lowering from the cloud base. And I took up a position on the east side of I-35 in Jarrell, thinking that the community, the town itself, was probably going to get hit. The tornado passed just west of the central part of the small town of Jarrell. It got very large. The noise, the sound of the tornado, I would compare to like being up real close to Niagara Falls. There was this roar, and the tornado was becoming rain-wrapped, and I could not, there's a bit of a hill, I could not see that there was a subdivision immediately in the path of the tornado.
School had just gotten out for the year, and all the kids were home with their moms, and a slow-moving F5 tornado going 5 miles an hour just ground up this neighborhood, Double Creek Estates neighborhood. Basically, it killed everybody. There was 1 or 2 survivors. One family survived because they were a Mexican-American family, and her husband was a mason. He was a bricklayer, and he had built a tornado pit under their house where a woman, 2 ladies, and I want to say 3 or 4 kids got into this little tornado pit and pulled a concrete lid over themselves, and they survived. And one lady who was blown out of her house, she was in her bathtub, was found in a tree, and she survived. But generally everybody that was in the Double Creeks Estates that were hit by that tornado died. It wasn't even any injuries. It was interesting that there were just very few injuries, all fatalities. And a lot of research was done afterwards on this, and it was because it was so slow moving.
It wasn't a pile of debris sitting on the concrete slabs. It's that everything had been removed from the concrete slabs. In a few instances, you could see some vinyl that had been glued down on the kitchen floor, and that was about it. The scratch marks in the vinyl on the foundations and looked in the direction the tornado was traveling. The scratch marks were from right to left, indicating that the tornado had destroyed and removed the homes along the leading edge of the tornado. Unfortunately, many of the children were at home, and in some instances, parents came home to be with their children. I would not want to describe the results, but bodies would not be intact.
People likened it to being put into a Cuisinart because it just chopped everything into small little pieces. It wasn't like there were big pieces of houses left. Everything was ground up into small pieces. So that's pretty graphic, but it's what happened.
At the Double Creek Estates, about 40 structures were totally destroyed. All 27 deaths associated with the Jarrell tornado occurred at Double Creek. After passing through, the tornado moved across County Road 309 and into a heavily wooded area of cedar trees. This is where total destruction from the F5 tornado would end.
Lon Curtis was in Williamson County, where yet another tornado tore through parts of Cedar Park, Texas. There, a church, trucking company, and an Albertsons grocery store were damaged. A historic train located on the north side of County Road 180, just to the east of US 183, was in the direct path of the tornado. The engine remained on the track, but a coal tender converted to hold diesel fuel and weighing about 65,000 pounds was flipped over and thrown a short distance. That resulted in F3 damage.
Another strong tornado more than 400 yards wide ripped through Pedernales Valley, staying on the ground for more than 5.5 miles. It began on Lake Travis, destroying nearly all of the watercraft. One person was killed. The man's mobile home was demolished and his vehicle tossed several hundred feet. As the tornado continued churning south, homes in the Hazy Hill subdivision were heavily damaged or destroyed. The tornado caused F4 damage.
Back in Cedar Park, Lon Curtis was listening to the news of what had happened, still unaware of how hard Jarrell had been hit.
So I'm sitting there in my pickup. I had a police scanner, and I'm listening to the Department of Public Safety dispatcher in Austin.
Please come here to our station. She's setting up a command post here. Copy. Thank you. We appreciate it.
I'm thinking, okay, well, they'll be sending help out here to Cedar Park. And what I'm hearing is every highway patrol unit that checks on the frequency is told, go to Jarrell. We have a command post being set up. Go to Jarrell. And I realized at that point something had happened in Jarrell that I couldn't see from where I was. I didn't know how bad it was. I just knew that they were also sending every ambulance they could find to Jarrell. Frankly, I sat in my truck and had a beer and sort of tried to take in everything that had happened. That was after 4 o'clock. So between a little after 1 and a little after 4, I'd seen a whole lot of tornadoes, some of them big, some of them small, and I didn't find out even the beginning of what had happened in Jarrell until I got back. I had to go through Jarrell on the interstate.
The initial death toll was 30 at Jarrell, but then it was revised down to 27 once they could go through and figure out if it was human or animal remains. It was just that bad. It was that terrible situation.
The tornado's movement and speed was unusual. Dr. Don Green says it caused this F5 tornado to be much different from the F5 that hit Newcastle and parts of Norman, Oklahoma on May 3rd, 1999.
How could one tornado have such a high lethality while another tornado of equal strength allow most of the people to survive? And my analog that could explain this is something like a lawnmower. In the case of Oklahoma, the tornado was going in the proper direction from southwest to northeast, but it was going over brick veneer homes, solidly built, which was also true of the Double Creek Estates in Jarrell. But in this case, going in the proper direction, the forward velocity was about 35 miles per hour. And so, by comparison, Jarrell would be an example of, if it were a lawnmower, it's kind of like stopping, leaving the lawnmower at rabbit speed, highest RPM, and you go in and get a drink of lemonade or something, and the lawnmower's just sitting there churning. The Oklahoma City tornado would be an example where you're moving forward at normal velocity.
The other similarity between what happened in Oklahoma City and Jarrell is that both communities had been hit by a tornado before.
In 1989, there was a tornado that moved right up on Interstate 35 from a mile or two south of Jarrell to a mile or two north of Jarrell at like 4:15, 4:30 in the morning, in the middle of the night. And there was, I believe, 1 or 2 fatalities out of that. And so Jarrell had to recover from that.
Priscilla King was a relief center volunteer following the 1997 tornado in Jarrell. She feels like the community has had its share of suffering.
This is the second time we've been through this, and this little community knows how to pull together. I had no idea. A lot of us have lost a lot of our friends and All of our kids have lost classmates at school, and it just makes you want to stay busy and do something.
The what-ifs don't make it any easier for Linda Mooring. She lost her brother Keith, his wife Cindy, and her two nephews, Eric and Ryan. They lived in a manufactured home that was completely destroyed. Nothing remained but the foundation.
At the time of the tornado, I was living in Colorado, so I got home here to Texas a day or so later, and boy, that was just a mess. We weren't allowed to go anywhere near the subdivision. They had it barricaded and blocked off, and you can understand why. So we all met at the church, all the victims' families who were waiting for notification were to gather at the church. So one by one, family members received their notification, and they left, once they got word. So 27 victims had to be identified. So they brought in a refrigerator truck to maintain the bodies. And we were the last family to be notified because my brother Keith was decapitated. And that was a big process of elimination and trying to recognize the bodies. They were hard to recognize. And, it was just a mess. So then it just took a long time to get that notification, 2 or 3 days, and there's not a day goes by now that I'll see a black cloud in the sky, and I think of that horrible death. It just, all 4 of them at once. It was terrible.
Bruce Thomas and his staff at KCEN-TV decided to take the tragedy from that late May day and find a way to raise money for victims and survivors.
We put together this, it was like an hour and a half or 2-hour video of the whole coverage, the recovery, the funerals, just everything. It was something. From this VHS tape we produced, Sam's Club gave us the tapes for free, and some dubbing house down in Houston dubbed them all for free. I mean, we didn't have, they sold out in a day or two, and we, like I said, it was a $20 donation, and then I can remember a guy crying when I gave him that check. A tough Texas cowboy kind of guy. Because no one had ever done anything for him like that before. He came to the TV station and we gave that check. So he had lost his house over in Moody, Texas, which is just west of the TV station. It wasn't just Jarrell that was hit. There were a whole bunch of people hit that day. Just Jarrell's where they all died.
Today, Bruce and his wife Ann reside in Kansas City. His job at Midland allows him to spread the word to residents across the country of how important it is to have a NOAA weather radio. He's even built a safe room at his home in the event that something like Jarrell would ever strike again.
Would tell people for years after that on television here in Kansas City, it is your personal responsibility to do what is right for you. And if that means getting in your car, if you don't have a safe place to take shelter, and driving to a shelter or driving away from the tornado, that is your personal option. Because once you've seen a whole bunch of people die that took your advice, possibly, and weren't able to survive it, then, I became a big advocate for tornado safe rooms after that event. It made me a believer that you not only need the warning, NOAA weather radio, television, now apps and smartphones, but you also need a safe place to go when there's a tornado coming. And having those two things probably will help your family survive a tornado. For months and months after that tornado happened, we couldn't go to a restaurant and pay for our own check. So people were very thankful for what we did, but it affects you. I felt like I did my best I could do that day, and I was sure sorry that so many people died, but they just didn't have good enough shelter, and that was the problem. They knew the storm was coming. They could see it coming, but just didn't have enough concrete and steel around them to withstand a slow-moving F5 tornado.
And for Linda Mooring, that's what hurts the worst. Witnesses told her they saw her brother and his wife standing outside of their Double Creek home watching the tornado.
Years later, I met a paramedic, and she was actually the paramedic that was assigned to my brother's body. And she told me where he was actually found. I haven't told anyone, and I'm not going to tell anyone because I don't want my family to know. It's better just to let, imagine, I guess, because truth hurts. Still suffering 20 years later. I feel like I've been robbed. Family gatherings and celebrations, hugs. It's such an empty hole. I can wipe the tears from my face, but I cannot take the pain from the heart. So with this, I honor Keith and Cindy and Eric and Ryan and everyone. Don't think it cannot happen to you, because it can.
Tornado Talk is written, researched, and produced by Jennifer Naramore and Dan Holliday. Audio courtesy of CNN, KCEN, and KXAN TV. We explore and investigate nature's most fascinating phenomenon on every episode of Tornado Talk. Catch up on past episodes by binge listening anytime online at tornadotalk.com.